If you've ever felt like you were second best, like your hard work was ignored while someone else got all the praise, you're going to understand every single word of this story. So before we dive in, do me a favor. Take a moment, hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories just like this one. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't loud. It's a whisper. And this one? Well, it's a symphony. My name is Emily. And this is the story of how my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, made me feel invisible for most of my life. They only saw me when they needed something. And when that day came, I finally had a choice. A choice to save them, or to save myself. I was the firstborn. The first child. The one who brought my parents into the world of parenthood. You'd think that would come with some kind of special status, a badge of honor. For a while, maybe it did. My memories of my earliest years are hazy and warm, a blur of being held, of soft lullabies and gentle praise. My mother, a woman who always wore a slightly harried yet proud expression, would tell me I was her little helper, her good girl. My father, a quiet man who spoke more with his actions than his words, would nod approvingly when I finished my vegetables or tidied my toys. I was taught from a young age to be compliant, to be agreeable, to be a source of calm in a house that I didn't yet know was waiting for a storm. That storm had a name. It was Ryan. My brother's birth didn't just add a new person to our family. It shifted the entire gravitational pull of our universe. It was as if a new star, brighter and more demanding, had ignited in the center of our home, and everyone, my parents, my grandparents, our distant relatives, was suddenly orbiting around him. I didn't understand it at first. I was just 4 years old, a small, curious observer. I remember the day they brought him home from the hospital, wrapped in a blue blanket. I wanted to hold him, to touch his tiny fingers. My mom smiled and said, "Not right now, honey. Ryan's tired." It was the first time I heard those words. They wouldn't be the last. My world became a series of small, significant slights that, at the time, I couldn't articulate. They weren't a slap or a scream. They were a sigh, a glance, a missed opportunity. My 4th birthday was the first time I truly felt the shift. I still remember the excitement, the little pink candles on the cake, the pile of brightly wrapped gifts. I was a little girl who loved to read, so my parents gave me a book. A beautiful hardcover book about a little girl who went on an adventure. I was thrilled. But then, my mom noticed Ryan, a 2-year-old toddler, sitting on the floor, looking bored. Without missing a beat, she reached behind the couch and pulled out a large, brightly colored box. "Oh, and this is for Ryan," she said, her voice dripping with an apologetic sweetness. "So he doesn't feel left out." The box contained a shiny, red remote-controlled car. I remember watching him as he shrieked with delight, the tiny plastic car whirring across the floor. I held my book. It felt heavy. I didn't know what jealousy was. But I knew, with the gut certainty of a child, that I was not the center of this day. I was an accessory. As we grew, the pattern deepened. My parents didn't mean to be cruel. I don't think they ever consciously sat down and decided, let's favor one child over the other. It was a slow, insidious erosion of my self-worth, 1,000 tiny cuts. When I asked to join dance classes, a dream I had after watching a recital on TV, my mom's face fell. "Oh, Emily," she said, running a hand through her hair. "That's so expensive. We just can't afford it right now." A month later, Ryan was signed up for soccer, complete with brand new cleats that were still too big for him, shin guards, and a personalized jersey. "He needs an outlet for all that energy," my dad explained, as if I had no energy, no passion, no needs of my own. My love of dance, my tiny budding dream, was simply not a priority. The pattern extended to our academic lives. I was a naturally studious, introverted kid. I spent hours in my room, not because I was punished, but because it was the one place where I felt like I existed. My world was the world of books, of good grades, of quiet achievement. I would bring home my report card, a crisp piece of paper with a column of straight A's. My mom would glance at it, nod and say, "That's my good girl. We knew you could do it." The conversation would end there. It was expected. It was the baseline. It was the least I could do. A few weeks later, Ryan would bring home his report card. A smudged, crumpled piece of paper with AC in science and AD in history. My parents would gasp with relief. "Look," my dad would exclaim. "He passed. At least he didn't fail." It was a cause for celebration. A trip to an ice cream shop. A new video game. I learned very quickly that my triumphs were met with a quiet nod, while his mediocre achievements were met with a party. It was easier to be Ryan. His existence was a constant low-grade emergency that required a lot of praise and intervention. Mine was just a given. I didn't scream. I didn't throw tantrums. I didn't act out. I just learned. I was second place. And the more I was pushed into that spot, the more I internalized it. I became the helper, the listener, the one who took care of everyone else's emotional needs while my own went unaddressed. I was an emotional sponge, soaking up everyone's worries, their fears, their anxieties. I became an expert at reading the room, at knowing when to be quiet, when to offer a hand, when to make a joke to diffuse the tension. All to ensure I wasn't an inconvenience. All to be useful, because being useful was the only way I could feel a faint flicker of my parents' attention. I remember one night, in high school, I had a breakdown. Not a loud, messy one. A quiet one. I was in my room, studying for a final, and the pressure just became too much. The weight of being the perfect one, the one who never stumbled, the one who had to carry the entire family's intellectual and emotional load, was suffocating. Tears started to roll down my face, silent and hot. I buried my head in my arms, and for the first time, I just let myself weep. After a few minutes, my mom came in. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just saw me, a crumpled mess on my desk. "What's going on, Emily?" she asked, her voice laced with a subtle impatience. "Are you just tired? Don't stress so much. You'll be fine. Ryan has a big game tomorrow. I need to get his uniform ready." And then she left. The door closed, and the silence that followed was louder than any shout. It was a silence that told me, unequivocally, that my pain was an inconvenience. My tears were a delay in a much more important operation. The constant, painstaking management of Ryan's life. That night, something inside me broke. And a new thought, a quiet, cold and powerful thought, began to take root. A thought of escape. Of a life not dictated by the needs of others. A life where my own triumphs were not met with a quiet nod, but a deafening cheer. A life where I was the main character, not an accessory. I started to pour all of my energy, all of my frustration, all of my pain, into my schoolwork. I wasn't just studying for good grades anymore. I was studying for a ticket out. A one-way ticket to a life where I was not an afterthought. I researched colleges, not the ones my parents suggested, but the ones far away, ones with prestigious programs and, most importantly, generous financial aid. I filled out applications in secret, staying up late in my room, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my determined face. The moment I got my acceptance letter was one of the most surreal moments of my life. It was to a prestigious university, a top-tier school, and not only was I accepted, but I was offered a full scholarship. It felt like a vindication, a cosmic course correction. My hard work, my years of quiet suffering, had paid off. My little one-way ticket was in my hand. I held the letter, my hands trembling with a mix of triumph and fear. I couldn't wait to tell my parents. This, I thought, this will finally make them see me. I called my mom, my voice shaky with excitement. "Mom, I got in," I said, a breathless laugh escaping my lips. "I got a full scholarship. I'm going to college." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, expectant pause. And then her voice, that slightly harried pragmatic voice, cut through my bubble of joy. "That's wonderful, honey. We're so proud. But, a full scholarship? Does that include housing? Because we can't afford to help with that. Not with Ryan. He'll be applying to colleges soon too. You'll figure it out. You're strong." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not a punch, but a cold, heavy blanket. The full scholarship wasn't enough. They were proud, sure, but their pride was conditional. It came with an asterisk, a little clause that said, "As long as it doesn't inconvenience us, and as long as it doesn't take away from Ryan." I was strong, they said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a chore. It was a burden they were placing on me. "You're strong," was their way of saying, "we're not going to help you." And then I knew. They would always, always choose him. That phone call, that single dismissive conversation, was the final nail in the coffin of my childhood. The last, Fading hope that my parents might one day see me as a person, not just a resource, was extinguished. It was a cold, hard dose of reality, and it hardened me in a way I didn't think was possible. The warmth I had once held for them, the desire for their approval, began to cool into a steely resolve. Fine. They wouldn't help. I would help myself. I didn't argue with my mother. I didn't plead or cry. I simply said, "Okay, Mom. I understand." And I hung up the phone. In that moment, I wasn't just accepting my fate. I was embracing it. I was shedding the skin of the good girl, and stepping into the raw, unvarnished truth of who I was. Someone who was on her own. I figured it out. Just as they said I would. I moved to a big city, one I had only ever seen in movies. It was a concrete jungle of noise and people and a million tiny apartments. I found the cheapest housing I could. A tiny room in a shared apartment with 3 other girls. We were all strangers, united by our shared state of being broke and ambitious. Our room was so small you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms out. The windows were cracked, and the heating was unreliable. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, shivering, pulling my thin blanket tighter around me and thinking about my parents' warm, comfortable home. But the memory didn't make me feel sad. It made me feel fierce. This cold, this discomfort, it was mine. It was a testament to my struggle, to my strength. My days were a grueling, non-stop grind. I went to class from morning until early afternoon, my brain absorbing everything I could. I was a sponge, determined to get every last drop out of that scholarship. My evenings and nights were spent working at a diner. The smell of stale coffee and fried food became the scent of my life. I worked until my feet ached, until my uniform was stained with grease, until my tips were enough to pay for my half of the rent and a week's worth of food. My diet consisted mostly of ramen noodles and whatever cheap, bland food I could buy in bulk. Sometimes, when money was particularly tight, I would skip meals. The hunger gnawed at me, a constant, low-grade ache. But with every pang, I would remember my mother's words, "You're strong." And I would tell myself, "Yes, I am. And I'll prove it to you." Not to them. To me. I didn't have time for a social life. I didn't have money for one. My college years were a blur of textbooks and shifts, of late-night study sessions in the library and early morning walks to the diner. While other students were at parties, I was balancing trays. While they were going on weekend trips, I was working double shifts. It was a lonely existence. I cried, of course. Not in front of anyone, but in the quiet of my tiny room. In the moments before I fell asleep, the weight of it all would crush me. I missed my friends from home, a home I no longer felt a part of. I missed the idea of a family who supported me. Meanwhile, a parallel reality was unfolding back home. My mom was an avid social media user. Her Facebook feed was a constant, curated chronicle of Ryan's life. "Our golden boy," she would write under a picture of him at a college orientation, a new laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "So proud of him for finding his path." I remember seeing a post of him moving into his dorm room, his bed a mess of new, store-bought bedding. My dad was there, helping him unpack, his face a rare, open smile. I wasn't in the pictures. I wasn't in their posts. I was an empty space, a non-entity. They were building a public narrative of their perfect little family, and I, the one who was out there actually making something of myself, wasn't even an asterisk. I wasn't asked. I wasn't considered. I graduated with honors. I walked across that stage, a strange mix of triumph and emptiness in my heart. No one from my family was there. They had a prior engagement, a euphemism for Ryan's soccer tournament. I stood in line with 100 other graduates, my cap and gown a silent, solitary monument to my achievement. I got my diploma, shook the dean's hand, and walked out of that auditorium, my head held high. I was done. I was free. And I hadn't needed them for a single step of the journey. I got a job right out of college, a low-level position at a large tech company. I worked harder than anyone else. I was the first one in, the last one to leave. I was driven by a quiet, burning fire. A fire of resentment, of self-preservation. I didn't just want to succeed. I needed to. I needed to build a life so strong, so secure, that no one, not even my family, could ever take it away from me. After a year, I got a better job at a different company. 6 months after that, I was promoted. Then another promotion. The money started to come in. Not a lot at first, but enough to move into my own place. A small, one-bedroom apartment. No roommates. My own space. I remember the first night I slept there. The silence so profound it was almost deafening. It was the sound of my own independence. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, I felt a deep, profound peace. I had built this. I had built me. My life became a testament to my will. I bought a car. A used one, but it was mine. I started taking vacations, something I had only ever dreamed of. I went to Europe, to Italy. I stood in front of the Colosseum, a place that had stood for thousands of years, and I felt a strange kinship with it. It had been built brick by brick, just as I had built my life. Alone. I ate a lavish, expensive meal in a restaurant with a view of the Arno River, and I thought about all the bowls of instant ramen I had eaten, all the shifts I had worked. The taste of the food was a victory, a sweet, savory triumph. And what about Ryan? My brother, the golden boy, the one for whom my life had been a constant sacrifice? He was still at home. He had gone to a local community college, but had dropped out after a semester. He drifted from one low-paying, meaningless job to another. A barista, a waiter, a dog walker. None of them stuck. He was living the life I had been told was my destiny. A life of mediocrity, of unfulfilled potential. My parents always made excuses for him. He's just having a hard time, my mom would say on our rare phone calls. He's just trying to find himself. They would always bring up me, in a strange, twisted comparison. You have it so much easier, Emily, they would say. You're so good at everything. He's just a boy. I would just listen, a cold, empty feeling in my stomach. The bitterness had long since worn away, replaced by a kind of numb detachment. I had built my life from the ground up, with no help, with no safety net, with no one to catch me if I fell. And they, still living in the house I grew up in, were making excuses for the person who had been given every advantage. I learned to live without them. I learned to build a life that didn't require their love or their approval. I had friends, a life, a career. I had everything I had always wanted, everything they had told me I couldn't have. Then, a few months ago I got a message. A single, short text message, from a number I hadn't seen in months. It was from my mom. Hey sweetheart. We need to talk. It's serious. The words were so jarring, so out of place, that I felt a jolt of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not a good feeling. A familiar one. The feeling of being needed. The feeling of being a resource. The feeling of being a safety net. After all these years, after all the silence, they needed me. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the time had come. The choice I had been building towards my entire life was finally here. I didn't respond to my mom's text right away. I let it sit there, an unread notification on my phone screen, for a full day. Then too. My phone, once a silent companion, began to vibrate with a new, frantic energy. A new text from my mom. Emily, please call me. It's urgent. A missed call from my dad. A rare occurrence. I could almost feel their anxiety, a palpable thing, radiating through the fiber optic cables and into my hands. They were panicking. They were desperate. And I was, for the first time in my life, in control. I went to work, I went to the gym. I met a friend for dinner. I lived my life, a life they knew nothing about, a life they had no part in. And with every passing hour, with every unreturned message, I felt a new sense of power. It wasn't a mean-spirited power. It was a cold, quiet clarity. A clarity that told me I had earned this. I had earned the right to make them wait. To make them feel, for just a moment, a fraction of the anxiety, the desperation, the fear of abandonment that I had felt for a lifetime. 2 days later, I called them. Not in the morning. Not in the afternoon. At 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night. A time when I knew they would both be home, sitting in the living room they had made so comfortable. My mom answered on the first ring, her voice so chirpy and bright it was jarring. Emily, honey. We were so hoping you'd call. How are you? It was a question I hadn't heard from her in years. A question that, coming from her, felt like a lie. A flimsy, transparent attempt at a normal conversation to disguise a much more urgent agenda. I ignored the question. You said you needed to talk, I said, my voice calm and even. There was a moment of silence. The cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by a nervous, hesitant tone. Yes, honey. Well, your father has some medical bills. A lot of them. He had a small procedure, nothing serious, but the insurance didn't cover as much as we thought. And Ryan? Well, Ryan is unemployed again. He got laid off. He's trying, of course, but you know how it is. And we got a notice from the utility company. Her voice trailed off, a series of clipped sentences that told a much larger story. A story of financial mismanagement, of a constant reliance on one person, and of a slow, creeping desperation. She was right. I did know how it was. My mind flashed back to my college days. The freezing apartment. The ramen noodles. The tiny, shared room. I remembered the hunger pangs, the constant worry, the fear that I wouldn't make it. I remembered the thousands of hours I had worked, the tears I had shed in silence, the emotional and financial price of my independence. So you need financial help, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Well, yes, sweetheart. Just a little. To help us get back on our feet. We'd pay you back, of course. Of course. My mind, a quiet, ruthless accountant, was tallying up the figures. The money they had spent on Ryan. The new car, the soccer gear, the trips to the ice cream shop. The college tuition they would have paid, had he not dropped out. The money I had never seen, the money that had been siphoned away from me, from my potential, and given to him, a person who had never earned it. My dad's voice, a low rumble, broke the silence. Emily, we're your family. We're in a tough spot. We're asking for your help. His voice held a familiar hint of righteousness, a subtle suggestion that I owed them this. That family was a transaction, a debt I was now obligated to pay. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had been planning for, consciously or not, for years. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I wasn't filled with a righteous rage. I was just calm. A quiet, cool, surgical kind of calm. Mom, I said, my voice so low she had to strain to hear me. Do you remember when I lived in a freezing apartment, eating ramen and walking to work because I couldn't afford the subway? Do you remember when I called you, so excited, and you said you couldn't help with housing because of Ryan? You never asked how I was doing. Not once. Silence. Just a long dead silence on the other end of the line. I could picture them, sitting on their couch, the weight of my words settling between them. I needed you too, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet power. I needed you to be there. I needed you to show me that I mattered as much as he did. And you just weren't there. My mom started to protest, a half-choked sound of denial and excuse. But Emily, we were young, we didn't know any better, we did what we thought was right. I cut her off, my voice still as a pond. I'm not mad, I said. I'm not. But I've learned something. Respect doesn't come with blood. It has to be earned. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I could almost hear the rustling of my dad shifting on the couch. My words were a hand, pushing them away, creating a chasm between us. Then, I delivered the final, calculated blow. It was a plan I had been formulating for the past 2 days. A slow, methodical plotting that was a million times more satisfying than a quick, angry word. I can offer you something, I said. Not money. Not a bank account number. My company is hiring. They have basic, entry-level positions. Customer service. Administrative roles. They pay well, and they have good benefits. I can put in a good word for both of you. You mom and you dad. I can help you get back on your feet. You'll have to work, of course. But you won't have to worry about Ryan's debt or the utility bills anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It was a moment of absolute, complete shock. They had called me expecting a lifeline, a handout, a no-questions-asked transfer of money from the strong one to the needy ones. And I had offered them a job. The one thing they had never wanted to do. Work. For me. Are you serious? My mom finally stammered. Dead serious, I said. I'm willing to help. But I'm not going to just send money. Not again. Not when I had to struggle to earn every single dollar myself. They got offended. Immediately. The defensiveness, the indignation, was so predictable, so very them. How could you say that? My mom said, her voice rising in pitch. You're being so cold. So selfish. My dad, who had been silent for so long, finally spoke up, his voice low and full of hurt. Emily, family is family. We're asking for your help. Family is family, I repeated, a small sad smile on my face. I learned that a long time ago. I just learned it in a different way than you did. I gave them the details of the jobs. I told them to send me their resumes. I was giving them a way out, a path to independence, to a life where they didn't have to worry. I wasn't leaving them to starve. I was giving them what they had never given me, a chance to stand on their own 2 feet. They hung up in a fit of righteous fury. They never called back. Not to take me up on the job offer, not to argue, not to make excuses. Just silence. And I went on with my life. The next day, I went to work. I bought a new dress. I met my friends for dinner. I was living my life, a life I had built from the ground up, with a foundation of struggle and a cornerstone of quiet revenge. The silence that followed that phone call was the most profound silence of my life. For weeks, my phone was dormant. No frantic texts. No missed calls. My parents, who had finally remembered I existed when they needed something, had retreated back into their world, the one where I was a non-entity. And that, I realized, was a victory in itself. They had chosen pride over survival, and in doing so, they had proven once and for all that their need for me was purely transactional. Their love, their affection, their brief and fleeting attention. It had all been a bank account number. And when I didn't provide it, they didn't want to talk to me anymore. The truth of our relationship was laid bare, and it was a cold, hard, unshakable thing. A few months passed. I heard through the family grapevine, a distant aunt who was always on Facebook, that my parents had moved. They had sold their house and downsized to a small apartment. Ryan had gone to live with his girlfriend, and my parents were working odd jobs, just barely making ends meet. The medical bills and the debt from Ryan's flailing career had finally caught up to them. They were struggling. They were scraping by. And for the first time in their lives, they were learning what it felt like to be completely, utterly on their own. I didn't feel joy at their misfortune. Not a wicked, gleeful joy. It was more of a quiet, somber satisfaction. A feeling of justice, of cosmic balance. They had placed me in this position. They had forced me to learn the hard lessons of independence, of self-sufficiency. They had told me I was strong, as an excuse for not helping me. And now, they were finally learning what that meant. I took a new job, a promotion I had been offered that came with a significant pay raise. I bought a new apartment, a beautiful, spacious place with a view of the city skyline. I started a new hobby, painting, something I had always wanted to do but had never had the time or money for. My life was full, rich, and meaningful. It was a life I had built, every brick of it laid by my own hand. And what about Ryan? I finally saw him by chance, at a grocery store one day. He was pushing a cart, and he looked older. His face etched with a kind of defeat I had never seen before. He saw me and for a moment his eyes lit up. "Emily," he said, a forced cheerfulness in his voice. "How are you? I heard you're doing great." I smiled. A real, genuine smile. "I am," I said. "I'm doing better than ever." He tried to make conversation, to ask for an update on my life, but I was polite and distant. He was still living the life of a child, the life of a golden boy, a life I had long since outgrown. I walked away from him, and I didn't feel anything. No anger, no resentment. Just a quiet, peaceful emptiness. He was just a ghost, a memory of a pain I had long since overcome. Sometimes, revenge isn't loud. It's not a furious, vindictive act. It's not yelling, or screaming, or slamming doors. Sometimes it's a calm voice. A boundary. A moment of clarity when you realize that you don't owe love to the people who only loved you when it was convenient. And that is when you finally win. I didn't choose to destroy my family. I chose to save myself. I chose to build a life so strong, so impenetrable, that their neglect, their indifference, their casual cruelty, could never touch me again. They had a choice too. A choice to take a step toward independence, a choice to work for their own survival, a choice to show me they were willing to earn back my respect. And they chose not to. They chose to cling to the past, to the old, comfortable narrative where I was the helper and they were the ones who needed help. And that, in the end, was their punishment. They were left with the life they had always created for me. A life of struggle, of independence, of being on their own. Resolution and reflection. I sit in my new apartment, a glass of wine in my hand, looking out at the city lights. I'm not a sad, bitter woman. I'm a person who has been forged in a fire, and who has come out the other side, not as ash but as steel. I still have a family of sorts. The friends who stood by me, who celebrated my successes, who were there for me in my silent moments of grief. The colleagues who respected me for my hard work and dedication. My family is not a matter of blood. It's a matter of earned respect. And I wouldn't trade my life for anything. Not for 1,000 apologies, not for 1,000,000 moments of their approval. Because my journey, my loneliness, my suffering, it made me who I am. Strong. Independent. And finally, visible. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your struggle was invisible, remember this. The people who truly matter will see you. They will cheer for you. And the people who don't, well, they'll show you who they are. What's a story you have about a moment you finally chose yourself? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you're still listening, you're part of this family. Thank you for listening.